are with us. We're especially pleased to have 3 people joining us from New York City, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Stacey Gillett, who's with the iZone Office of Innovation in the New York City Public Schools. Chrystina Russell, who's a principal at Global Tech Prep. And I am especially thrilled that we have a student joining us today, Kaira Batiz, because I always think if you want to know what's happening in our schools, you should ask the students. And if you want to know what we need to do better, ask the students that too. So we're going to be able to hear from Kaira today. So basically what we're hoping today is that Stacey, Chrystina, and Kaira are going to share a little bit of their work with us, start us off by describing to us what sorts of things they're up to and some of the lessons that they're learning as they do that. And then we're going to open it up for lots of questions from you all. So we're relying on you all to help us have an interesting conversation today. My role is to hear your questions. They'll be coming through to me electronically as you type them, and I'll be the one who's sharing those questions with our presenters and inviting a kind of virtual dialogue. So please listen carefully and ask us lots of questions, because that's what's going to make this rich and worthwhile. So let me start off by introducing all 3 of our presenters in a little bit more detail than what I just did, and then I'll turn it over to them. So first off, we have Stacey Gillett, who's the Chief of Staff at the Office of Innovation in the New York City Department of Education. As you can see from the bio, Stacey brings a lot of experience in government, which those of you who come from other sectors who are joining us today may find it interesting to talk with Stacey about some of the things she's learning as she comes from government into education. We also have Chrystina Russell, who's a principal at Global Tech Prep, one of the schools in the iZone. She, as you can see from her bio, briefly thought about being a lawyer, but we're very glad she decided to become an educator, became a teacher through the New York City Teaching Fellows Program, and is leading this amazing school that you're going to get to hear about today. And finally, we have Kaira Batiz, who's an 8th grade student at Global Tech Prep. She has been there for a couple of years, which makes her an expert about the school. And you'll see from her bio that she came to New York from Honduras and is taking full advantage of her time at Global Tech Prep, going to Washington, D.C., and taking advantage of all the different opportunities at Global Tech Prep on her way to becoming a doctor. So we'll hear from Kaira in a little bit. Stacey, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about the iZone and your work there.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Tim, can I go next slide? Great. Let's go one more slide, please. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you to the Ask Center for hosting this webinar on the work that's happening in New York City, specifically within the Innovation Zone. So just as a general overview, the Office of Innovation was created a little over a year ago when then Chancellor Klein looked at the data and said, over the past decade, we have tried hard and made great successes with getting more kids through high school. And while we're tremendously proud of that effort, we're seeing with the data that the students are just not succeeding in the way that we hope that they will succeed once they graduate high school, once they get into college and career. And so he tasks the Office of Innovation with understanding what are some of the root causes to that problem and what innovative strategies could we use to try to reverse that trend. And so the office then went out and spoke with a number of different practitioners, with experts from around the world, academics and whatnot, to understand, again, what is the root cause and what could we do to change it. And the consensus that really came back was this idea that part of the problem with schooling today is that it's structured as it was 150 years ago. And by that we mean it's a very standardized way of teaching and learning, whereby in most classrooms you have one teacher that's teaching the same content at the same pace in the same way to all students. And through that we're losing out on a lot of individual potential and motivation and engagement, and thus this is the problem that we're seeing once students complete high school. And so the Office of Innovation was tasked with working with schools to think about how schools could better personalize learning. How could we address the needs, strengths, motivations of every student within a school that would lead them to greater success in college and career? And so out of that came the Innovation Zone, which is really just a community of innovative New York City schools, all public schools, that are committed to better personalizing learning. And they're doing this, as we'll get to this in a moment, in a wide variety of ways. based on the needs of that particular school community and what works best for the school leadership, the teachers, the parents, and the students. Tim, if we could go next slide. So there's three main strategies that we're using within the innovation zone to advance this idea of personalization. And before I get into these three, I would just generally say that in some cases we have schools that are thinking about personalization in certain classrooms, certain grades, with certain students, and maybe with a piece, this innovation, a small innovation here, a small innovation there. On the other end of the spectrum, we have schools that are thinking about a whole school redesign. What does it mean to make your entire school, all of its resources, every aspect of its organizational structure focused on personalization? So the first is iZone 360. And that is our whole school redesign, the most comprehensive reforms. And that's what you'll hear about from Chrystina and Global Tech Prep. And as I mentioned, those schools are thinking about all aspects of their school, from their budget, their staff, their space, instruction technology. And they've been in a very intensive planning period for the past several months, and implementation will begin there in the fall. The second category is called iLearn NYC, and that's the district's initiative to expand online and blended learning. It's actually the country's largest district to take on this work. And that was a pilot in 41 schools this past year, scaling up to 125 schools in the coming year. And iLearn NYC really addresses this issue of personalization in two primary ways. The first is through a fully virtual course. We see this happening a lot in our smaller schools, for example, in our smaller high schools, where they just don't have the resources and the staff to hire up enough teachers to teach multiple AP classes or foreign languages or electives to very many students. And so then through iLearn NYC, they're able to offer additional course offerings to students based on their learning needs. The other side is called a blended learning environment. And mainly what that means is that a face-to-face teacher who has students in the classroom is bringing in digital resources to help them better differentiate in their instruction for every student in the classroom. And then thirdly, we have Innovate NYC, which is really the R&D function within this R&D office that's thinking about, as I mentioned, these specific innovations, specific classrooms, specific grades, things such as School of One, which some of you may have heard about, that's just in math and middle schools, or these personalized learning systems, which are some adaptive learning technologies that we're piloting in grades 3 through 5 in elementary schools. So that's the basic lay of the land of the innovation zone. I'd say that all three of these work very closely together. For example, all of the iZone 360 schools are using the digital resources available through iLearn NYC. So while we're structured this way, it's very fluid. Next slide, please. And this is, I won't go through it word by word because we'll distribute these slides afterwards, but this is just an overview of the various supports that the iZone is providing to schools. The way that the iZone is situated is and structured is really with this belief that the energy and the ideas all lie at the school, and that the Office of Innovation is really here to figure out how we can best support schools in advancing the innovative work that they want to do. What we find often is that schools have these ideas, but for a variety of constraints, be it resource, be it policy constraints, that they're not able to advance the work. And through these supports at the school level, at the network level, and through policy reforms, we're hoping to lessen the barrier to entry for schools to do this work. And I'll just do a quick note to say that the networks in New York City, for those that aren't aware, are effectively little mini districts. Effectively, they're not that, but they are these bodies where there are about 25 to 30 schools that affiliate per network, and the networks are there to provide a variety of operational and instructional support for schools. And so we have structured a lot of our work and our supports around leveraging the resources that are currently available at the networks to support the schools. Next slide, please. These are just a few examples of what the iZone looks like on the ground. So what we're often hearing from people on the field, from schools and broader communities is, I understand and I fully support this idea of personalization, but what exactly does that look like? So I just wanted to walk through a few examples. So one is this idea that, going to this idea of the smaller high schools that aren't able to offer the variety of coursework that their students often need, we're using the sharing of teachers and sharing of courses across schools. So for example, we have one school in Manhattan that is partnered with a high school in the Bronx. Geographically very separate schools and demographically rather different schools. But we have, for example, an AP teacher that's based at the high school in Manhattan that has a class of, let's say, 10 students that are physically in her classroom, and she's teaching the AP course too. She's then using Skype, or in some cases a Cisco telepresence device, to teach 10 additional students that are at the school in the Bronx. So the students in the Bronx and Manhattan maybe meet each other face-to-face once a semester at most, but that teacher is teaching, again, half students physically in their classroom and half students virtually. This allows for a tremendous efficiencies with the limited resources that all schools and all governments are facing at this time, where we can find those teachers in those courses that are really great at advancing students and offer those opportunities up to students beyond that school building. A second example is what one of our high schools is doing with playing around with what does time mean in school and what does the normal schedule look like. And so they have been able to extend the school day to 200 days within the existing UFT contract. And they're doing this by getting rid of summer vacation as we know it and having these month-long breaks throughout the year, which allows them to extend the school day. It also allows their students to have either periods of rest throughout the school year or to really engage in an area of interest that they're deeply passionate about during the year, and so maybe do a 1-month intensive on horticulture or something like that. That's a particular interest to the student, and getting them out into everything that New York has to offer and having them learn more from what's available in New York City, not just what's available within the classroom. A third innovation that many of our schools are embarking on is this idea of competency-based learning. It's the idea that today when students receive a grade, either on a quiz, a final, a report card, let's say they get a C. It's very difficult for that student to understand with that maybe 70%, what did they actually understand in that course and what didn't they understand. And what we're trying to do is get to an assessment system where students understand the very specific skills that they're expected and that we hope that they understand before they move on to the next course or the next unit, and that they are assessed based on their mastery of those specific skills. And then they move forward on their own time based on how long it's taking them. If it's taking them 2 months, great, then we move them on. If it's taking them 1.5 years, okay, so then we do that and we move them on at that point. The fourth thing that we have here is, as I was mentioning before, this personalized learning systems program where schools are using adaptive learning software to really understand and tailor instruction to individual students' needs. And so we're using a variety of programs that are all a bit different, but bottom line is they take a baseline assessment of where a student is at and then provide teachers real-time data so that teachers are able to work with the software and with their instruction and help move each student along at their own pace and in their own way. So you might have 30 students reading the same type of story, but some might be reading at a 2nd grade reading level and some might be reading at a 5th grade reading level, for example. And then finally, we're thinking about the role of the teacher and what it means to use adults in a school. And so if you think today that teachers have a whole host of responsibilities from lesson planning and classroom management and assessment, trying to think about and understand which teachers are best at which components of these jobs, and then thinking about if we can structure the way that they use their jobs and their time to work at what they enjoy best and what they are most proficient at, which will, number one, benefit the students, and number two, hopefully increase their job satisfaction. Next slide. So again, I won't go into every one of these specifics, but we are evaluating and researching the impacts of this work, both with an internal research team and with the support of external researchers, including some from Harvard. And what we're thinking about here is mainly, do iZone students show greater achievement gains than their peers in non-iZone schools, both on your more traditional student achievement metrics, such as credit accumulation and graduation rates, but also on some metrics that have been empirically linked to greater success in college and career, such as self-directed learning and engagement and motivation, and these things that we know that our students are going to need once they graduate from high school. We're also looking at the impact of these innovations on teachers. Again, does it increase their job satisfaction? Does it increase their feelings of their efficacy in the classroom? And then looking at implementation and trying to figure out where have there been road bumps, how could we fix those, and what is the best way to be supporting schools in implementation. Next slide. will be the final piece of my overview, which is just to say that in fall of last year, Mayor Bloomberg committed to supporting 400 iZone schools over the next 3 years. Again, we had a pilot of 80 schools last year, moving over more than doubling to about 165 schools this coming year. And ultimately, what we hope to see is that the iZone work is happening in a very concentrated way within these 400 schools. But we're also very focused on how is it that we can take the lessons that we're learning and have an impact citywide, so that this is not happening as a boutique initiative. Rather, it's something that will affect all 1,700 schools within New York City.
Thank you very much, Stacey. Of course, anything that's a boutique effort in New York City is bigger than most of our systems. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We're getting lots of questions coming in. Thank you for those. Keep them coming. We're going to hold those for now while we listen to Chrystina and Kaira. And so keep those questions coming, and then once we've heard from Chrystina and Kaira, we're going to open it up and really start diving into your questions. So thank you, Stacey. Chrystina, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Wanted to thank the Ash School for inviting us to do this webinar and share about our school and the iZone. I'm Chrystina. I'm the principal of Global Tech Prep.
And I'm Kaira. I'm a student from Global Tech Prep.
Okay, so we can start with our slides. Okay, so this is just an overview of our school, and as you just heard from Stacey, there's many schools in the iZone, and we're one of many, and I would really encourage everybody to take a look if this webinar piques your interest in what some of the other schools are doing, which is vastly different across many different schools. So we are a 6 through 8 school. We have about 200 students. And I'm not going to go through every single statistic on the slide. Everybody can read at it and look at it on their own. But the main point of our slide is that we are working with generally what would be considered a high-needs population. We have a fair amount of students with IEPs, many students coming from single-parent homes, as well as 100% free and reduced lunch population. So I wanted to let our audience know that because I think it's really exciting to see the way that this technology can really move our kids ahead. Similar to many other high-need schools, our students often come in a few grade levels behind, and so we really need to work hard to get them caught up and back on grade level. The other important point I wanted to make, because we are in Harlem and many people often associate Harlem with charter schools, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows we are a public school and we don't do screening of any type. All students living in the neighborhood are welcome to attend our school. We can go to the next slide. So just to give you an overview of what we're doing instructionally and what we're trying with innovation in our school, we're a one-to-one school. All students have a laptop computer. Teachers have smart boards, video recording devices, some iPads here and there to use in the classroom. We also have a program in particular because we have a high level of students with IEPs or special learning needs. We have a program where we systematically move students out of special education. So a lot of research shows us that, in particular, our Black and Latino boys are over-identified for special education. So what we do is we create a program where all students move into less restrictive environments, even if they may not be quote-unquote ready in the traditional sense. We make sure that we provide the teacher support and the technology support that students need to move out of small classes. So by the time students leave our school, there are no students that are in small classes any longer. We are using a lot of software programs, and I believe in some of our extra information that will be sent out. There's a website that can give you details about all of our software programs that we use if you're interested in knowing about that. I wanted to highlight our use of PowerSpeak and Middlebury Interactive Languages, just to give an example of how we're trying to work with both software and traditional teaching models to offer students more choice. So with PowerSpeak, students are given the option of 5 different languages, and they are able to choose what they learn, and the teacher works both with the online teacher support and online curriculum, as well as doing some lessons in her own classroom. And I'm going to have Kaira just for a moment talk about the foreign language that she studies and how her experience has been compared to a traditional classroom.
The first year when I started Global Tech Prep, I did Chinese for a year, and it was actually interesting. I learned a lot about Chinese culture, and I learned how to speak the language. But the second year, I realized that I needed to do better with my Spanish because I'm Hispanic. So I realized that I needed to do better with my Spanish. I really lack on reading Spanish and writing Spanish down. So I started to learn my own language, thinking about how this will help me in the future. And it's a really interesting software.
Okay, so that's just an example of offering students more choice. If we just had a traditional language program, Kaira would have been stuck with whatever language the teacher could teach and also wouldn't have the option of changing. The display of our work is on what we call digiboards, and those are basically flat screen monitors that are in our school. So rather than seeing the work on paper, because we're doing so much on the computers and the kids are working so hard with all these multimedia presentations, it didn't really make sense to use paper bulletin boards anymore, and so we switched over to a different platform. And lastly, our students do a combination of work products. I wanted to emphasize that our students still have to take the same standardized tests as all the rest of students in New York State, and so that is a traditional pen and paper test. So students are still doing a lot of work in what would be considered a traditional manner, and at other times they're doing things like podcasts and the web pages, tutorials online, gaming assessments, and videos. For those assessments, which we're really excited about, we feel like it gives a fuller picture of student performance rather than just sheer test numbers. We decided to keep those in digital portfolios. And so this is Kaira's portfolio on the next slide, if we can go to that. So here's Kaira, and we did a screenshot because the web connection was running a little bit slow if we broadcast it out to everybody. But this is an example of what the digital portfolio looks like. So there you can see Kaira, and she's giving a presentation about an overview of her work for the year. And then all on the left-hand side, you're able to click on Kaira's work, which includes a podcast, some PowerPoints, a math tutorial which went online, and I believe there's also going to be information provided to you, all the participants today, that can log in with a password to look into this further if you wanted to see what the work looks like. So these are the instructions on logging into the portfolio. There's the website, and you can click in webinar for your login and password, and Kaira's portfolio will come up for you. One thing I wanted to emphasize with this is that teachers can put in rubrics and assess the students. They're aligned to whatever state. I know this platform is in multiple states. You can put all your state standards in here, which makes life easier for teachers. And of course, the new Common Core standards can also be put in there. And in New York City, students just don't get to go right to a high school. They actually have to go into an application process. And so we're really excited to see how this will help students like Kaira and others hopefully stand out amongst other candidates, as well as to think about and reflect on their work. So each time Kaira enters about her work, she's asked to talk about the assignment as well as talk about how well she did or did not do on each assignment. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to talk about course budgeting, and I'm sure there'll be some questions that come up about that because we are a regular public school on a regular public budget, which requires a lot of partnership work, grant work, and creativity, of course. So this is just an overview of some of our partners. Obviously, our central partner being the iZone initiative at the Central Department of Education. And so we're working with Kunskapsskolan about goal setting, Apple to make sure that teachers and students know how to use their machines to the best that they can. And they also provide us with instructional support and some hardware and software support. We're also very proud of our partnership with Citizen Schools. And Citizen Schools extends our learning day until 6 o'clock p.m. And again, I'm going to take a brief testimonial from Kaira about her experience in Citizen Schools and the types of activities that she's been engaged in.
Citizen Schools has been really interesting. They have spoke about college with me. They had me think about how important my future is. And actually, we did this project called CSU, I think it's called. Yeah, CSU, and we had to write an essay about that we had to send to the school at the college that we wanted to get into, and it was like a review to me, think about what I could write about, and I actually got a reward for my essay because I did excellent on my essay. Also, they help us with our homework. Not many students this is Harlem, so not many students sometimes can provide themselves with laptops or computers, so this is a good way we could do our homework and not have excuses for not doing our homework. Also, they try to help us with our vocabulary, with our language, with ELA and math. So it's like we're doing school again, but we're having fun at the same time.
Okay, and I also just wanted to add on that Citizen Schools brings in a whole slew of volunteers from multiple companies, Google, Alliance Bernstein, fitness companies, and they do apprenticeships with kids twice a week in which they get to, in a hands-on manner, explore careers, and it culminates in a big wow presentation in which all of our community, parents, brothers, sisters, community members come in and really celebrate the hard work of the kids. So this has been a lot of work for us, but it's been really worth it, and I think a lot of research is showing that if we are going to catch kids up, that they need extra time in schools. So Citizen Schools has been a great partner for us in that. We also participate in another Department of Education grant called Connected Learning, which helps us get computers into parents' homes, provides instructional support, and a mouse squad where students can become experts in fixing computers. CA Inc. is a wonderful partner through the Pencil program, and CA has done everything from give students like Kaira a chance to go visit Washington, D.C., and provide us with extra financial support when we need it, and also gives our students a chance to go down to their office and see the office and participate in programs where they get to act as an executive in the office. So they open a lot of great opportunities. Cisco and Lazard also have greatly supported us with grants and encouragement to teachers. One budgeting strategy for me, though, despite all these great partners, there's still never enough money to do everything we want to. And a big budgeting strategy has been getting donations and grants to cover things like the arts and physical education. We also, had our money in our first year to purchase furniture, and as you can see in the last bullet, because New York City principals manage their own budgets, I was able to go and get the furniture donated, and in turn took that money and purchased our digiboard. So it's a lot of creativity and trying to get donations, but that's the nice thing about New York City and talking to other principals in other states. Something that can be difficult is that their spending may be largely cut out for them, and so we're not able to, sorry for the ringing, everybody. We're able to make our choices on our own and get creative in that way if we want to. And we can go to the next slide. So these have been our central lessons learned and challenges, and I think I'm definitely over my 7 minutes, as I tend to do when talking about the school. So I'll go over these, and I think a lot of this will hopefully come up in the questions. But one of the central things we've learned with our teachers is that making sure that we always teach content and not technology. So we never actually teach students PowerPoint or teach students podcasts, just teaching them that. We always teach the content, and as we're teaching the content, they learn how to make their final products through technology, but we don't ever have a technology class per se. Also, teachers really need an environment where they can safely take risks because some innovations will work, some won't, and teachers have to really feel like it's okay to take risks, it's okay if something doesn't work. And along with that, you know, I still firmly believe in all the success that students and teachers have had with technology, that everything always comes down to the teacher, and that will still be within our school the most important indicator of what students do. So some of the challenges have been ensuring that teachers get enough support with limited time and limited money. It also has been difficult with so many different programs out there with technology to make sure that we choose and prioritize things. So we don't want to overload teachers or myself or students with a lot of different initiatives, but making sure that anything we decide to do, we put time, money, and space behind it. Another, as you saw from the last partnership page, is managing government, private, and nonprofit partnerships. It's really been an essential part of my job. And that can be demanding. That could be a full-time job within itself, but there are also all these other demands of the principalship. So balancing those two things can be a challenge. And I think lastly, and probably my biggest challenge and sort of, something that I wrestle with philosophically, because I can certainly see both sides of this, is reconciling the inherent tension that's there between accountability and innovation. So if our accountability measures are created off of best practices for traditional type schools, they may not include some of the things that we're working on, and some of the things that we're working on may cause us to forego some of the more traditional aspects. So schools do have to be held accountable, as in any other organization, but it can be difficult when, for example, my job requires an evaluation that does not really, address the things we're working on in a traditional-based model. So
thank you.
That's our presentation.
Thank you, Chrystina, and thank you, Kaira. We're going to go ahead and dive into some of the questions now. One heads up for those of you who are listening out there, we also are going to be occasionally putting up poll questions that we invite you to weigh in on as we engage some of your questions. So keep those questions coming. I'm going to start off with one of the things Chrystina was just talking about that we've had a couple different questions related to, which is you say teachers are still most important even with the various ways we have students learning. So let's talk a little bit about teaching, and then we'll get into some of the questions about how do you support all of this work. So the teaching in particular, we got some questions about what does the learning for teachers look like? What is the professional development? And Chrystina, you said this is a bit of a challenge, figuring out how to support teachers. So can you tell us a little bit about what that supporting teachers looks like, and whether, how did you get people to buy into this kind of different way of doing teaching and learning to begin with?
Sure. So, a large part of it is based on teacher buy-in. And so what I've always done is I've never really brought a program to teachers and said, okay, here, you have to do this. It takes a longer time, but really we bring different programs in different places, let's say once we have some money or if we get a grant, and we all discuss it together. And teachers decide if they feel like this would be something they want to engage in, if it's helpful to students or not, what they think the quality of the program is. And so we never, well, I shouldn't say never, because, there are instances where sometimes a quick decision is required, but to the extent possible, I really try to have teachers have a voice in what they're going to be using and teaching and learning with, and I think that's a good first step. The other is that it takes a lot of extra time, and so for teachers to be trained in all of these programs, we do sort of not double of everything, but we really plan money to be able to pay teachers for their time. And it's not always about money, but I really believe teachers have to be paid for that extra time. And so spent a lot of Saturdays working. Last week, our teachers were in all week getting ready for the school year. And so we carve out money to support the learning. And then we do a combination of people coming in, and of course, always the most important aspect is the in-house expertise. So we really have two incredibly strong technological people on staff that are also teachers, and they're sort of the point people that can go, the teachers can go to for help. So they have sort of these in-house experts. So all teachers don't have to be technical experts, but I think staff need to have, have a couple point people that can really help people along. And then the last part is, from the policy and central support aspect, is that the iZone has been able to, through Race to the Top money and other privately donated money, provide money for us to pay teachers for professional development, as well as to offer a menu of choices to teachers. And so I guess to summarize, we try to collaborate together and decide together on what we're going to learn, and we always make sure that we carve out sort of the time and money to support teachers through that. And then lastly, making sure that we don't have too many things going on at once. We try to take on a couple of things and do them really well.
Thank you, Chrystina. And we're getting several questions for Stacey, kind of extending this to say, okay, now we got a little picture of what it looks like at the school. What does it take to support schools that are doing this work? So specifically, Stacey, can you tell us a little bit about two things? One is, what kinds of networks do you work with that are supporting schools? That's one question we got. And then the second piece is, why don't we do that one, and then I'll fire the second question at you. So how, as you hear from Chrystina about what her teachers need, how are you supporting them from the iZone?
Sure. So actually there's a slide, well, I can just talk through it. The slide that I was showing earlier with the school and network level support. So at if you go back a few more. So at the school, we're providing a number of things. One is for the schools, which is most of them that are using some sort of technology to advance the goal of personalization, we are providing the hardware and the software that they need to advance this work, as well as the infrastructure upgrades that they need to do it. As many of you may know, it's not as easy, especially in a lot of our older buildings. It's not as easy as just putting schools' computers into the classroom. It's making sure that they have the bandwidth and the electrical upgrades and whatnot. It's really a massive undertaking from the technological side, as well as obviously the tech support needed to support the work. Through iLearn NYC, in addition to that, we're providing a new learning management system, which is an online platform by which we're bringing in content from over 12 online content vendors. And also any student or teacher that wants to teach or learn in an online environment logs onto this platform, can upload the content that they want, can interact with their peers, can interact with their teachers. Teachers can interact across schools. And if they're authoring their own online content, they can share that content across schools. So it's really thinking about and supporting how you can do online learning in a very community-based way. We are providing, as Chrystina mentioned, a variety of ways to do professional development, both in terms of funds to support teachers spending the extra time to do this work, as well as bringing in a number of partners and experts from out of New York City, DOE, and out of New York City, for that matter, that have expertise in school change and in personalization. We are also providing some additional full-time staff to help these schools move this work forward, and sometimes that's on helping them really brainstorm ideas and develop these ideas that they have, and sometimes it's on like project management. We've got all of this new stuff going on in the school. Let's help lessen your load as you work through that. And then I'd say another very, very significant piece there is this community building aspect. As I mentioned earlier, we firmly believe that the ideas and the energy and the momentum are coming from the schools. And what we've seen over quite some time is that there are pockets of innovation happening throughout the city, and there's schools doing really fantastic stuff. A lot of times that's happening under the radar because of these accountability concerns or a variety of other concerns. And what we are really focused on in the Innovation Zone is how can we bring that work to scale? Both to scale, and how can we advance the good work that's already happening? And so we have really structured ourselves in a way where we can support this community-based approach and make sure that schools are sharing best practices and learning from one another, and that they are really pushing one another forward, because, again, that's where we really think that the energy and the ideas are.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess the one piece I didn't add there, and I'll just say, is the policy reform piece, which sounds like it's already coming up a few times. And there I'd say there's some work that we have advanced and been successful at. For example, we've worked with the state to amend these spending regulations, where it used to be that there were separate textbook, software, and hardware funds. And we worked with the state to have that essentially all lumped into one so that schools can use their funding more flexibly. We also work with the state to change a regulation that now allows schools to grant credit based on online coursework. But to Chrystina's point, there's still a lot of policy issues and policy barriers that we are working on and that we're trying to make sure that they align with the innovation work that's happening in schools.
Well, we'll talk about more of those in just a minute. But
Sure.
Stacey, you started answering one of the questions I had. That was part B that I decided not to ask you right at the first, which is, what happens if you don't have the best ideas at a particular school? I mean, I know when I was a teacher and a principal, we had an amazing staff that worked really hard, but we didn't always know how to solve some of the real learning challenges that come up in the school. So it sounds like you answered that partially with some of the supports you give, but I'm curious for either Stacey or Chrystina, what if you bump up against a problem you can't solve? How does the iZone help with that? What does that look like?
Well, Chrystina, do you want to take a stab at that first in your experience?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely don't always have the best ideas. You're exactly right, Elizabeth. And I think that goes back to the point of trying to create an environment that is safe for risks, and especially when it comes to innovation. So, we have a running staff meeting every Thursday in which our teachers all come together, and according to the union, they cannot be required to come to the lunch, but they all do, and I'm grateful. So I do buy them lunch as sort of an incentive. But that's really our time where we come together and we just talk about how are things going. Is it going well? Is it not going well? And, the thing is, even when something is going well, there are always a pocket of students that still may not be finding success under that model. And so even if something's going well, we'll try and really talk about that group of kids that might still be struggling, or talk about the ways that we can modify and refine things, or in some cases just totally have to drop something if it's not, being successful. And so it's not really an exact science, and perhaps it should be more of that, but, I'm lucky to have a staff of pretty experienced teachers, and so they can really look at and know their kids and see how things are going and how they're going well, how they're not, and then I also see it as my job as a school leader to not make all of those decisions, but to really be listening during those meetings, really hear what the teachers are saying, and to modify what we're doing accordingly. So for us, it's never, for any school, nothing's ever done. You can always be better. There's always, things that you need to improve your school for. But we try to keep that running conversation, and we don't just do it once or twice a year check-in. I feel it's really important that it's a running discussion in which everybody has a voice and talking about how students are responding to different innovations and then what our next steps should be.
Yeah. And I would say that we in New York City are very lucky right now because Mayor Bloomberg has made it a hallmark of his administration, and certainly Chancellor Walcott is very supportive of this idea that innovation doesn't always work, and we know that, and we know that going into it. And of course, we hope that as much as possible does work, but we are constantly looking at implementation data, student achievement data when we get it, to try to understand what's working and what it's not, and be nimble enough to change that quickly. And I think through Race to the Top, through private funds, we have enough flexibility, and certainly we have a staff and a team that is thinking flexibly enough and quickly enough that we can make pretty rapid adjustments. And we, in many ways, as I said, this office is just about a year old, and so we are working in many ways like a startup, and we are fixing and tweaking as we go along. I'm not sure if that totally answers the question, Liz.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure you could talk for a lot longer, but I appreciate you guys are trying to keep your answers short enough that we can get a little taste of what you're doing and also answer more questions. So Kaira, I have a question for you in just a minute, but I want to take up this topic you guys have both alluded to a couple times, Stacey and Chrystina, about how do you foster a culture of innovation and risk-taking, particularly in the context of our current accountability environment, which, Chrystina, you said you have empathy and understanding of why accountability is important. But, I mean, I think most people would agree that our current pre-K to 12 system, generally speaking, is not set up to incentivize innovation. It's not set up to create space for failure. There's no time for failure, even with some of the shifting policies on No Child Left Behind right now. So how do you all think from both the school level and the district level you're really making it okay to fail? That's pretty countercultural, and yet how do you still have accountability for providing students like Kaira what they need to succeed?
So I can just start there. I mean, I'd say first off, we're not perfect at it. I don't know anybody that is perfect at it, and it's certainly something that comes up as a concern often from schools, and rightly so. I'd say where we're coming from is first trying to figure out what are the real barriers and what are maybe some of the perceived barriers. And what I mean by that is there are some evaluation tools out there and assessment tools for schools that aren't directly aligned with innovation, but when you really look at the work that these schools are doing in this goal of personalization, it's not a whole lot more than like really good teaching. The problem is that a lot of schools don't have the time or the resources to really focus on every individual student. But we find when we really look at some of these assessment tools that what our schools are doing shouldn't be misaligned with the way that we're assessing schools in general. And so we take that as it is, and then what we do there is try to just educate as much as possible. And so work with the networks, work with our clusters, which are a level higher than the networks, work with our superintendents to make sure that they understand the alignment between what's happening in the innovation schools and what's happening in a more traditional school. And then we find that there are real barriers. And I'd say, like I said, there have been some that we've been able to tackle without a whole lot already happening in the schools, and that's been great. And then there's some other areas where mainly internal or external parties are saying we've got to see some evidence that this works, and when we do, then we're going to allow for greater flexibility. But obviously it's not something that the schools always want to hear, and so that's a bit of a balancing act there to figure out how do you really create that space. First, because they obviously can't do as much of the innovation without that space. And so that's the balancing act, but I think it's really a multi-tier approach in terms of how we create that space. Chrystina, I'm sure you have much more frustration. Sure.
Yeah, it's always harder at the school level. And, so our jobs as principals and teachers' jobs rest on these accountability measures. So they are important. They can't be ignored, and we have to address them enough to do well enough on them. But I think for me, I've had to really prioritize which ones I feel like are really important for us and which ones are, okay, we are going to be adequate on this, but we may not get the highest mark out there because we're going to really put that time and energy into being innovative and using technology. So I think, sort of choosing those that we're just going to be sufficient on and those that are really aligned to the work that we're doing. I also think that some of the rhetoric in the media and sort of this frenzy around No Child Left Behind, or, even with Race to the Top, there's a new teacher evaluation system, which is going to be heavily numbers concentrated. I feel like it's important to really read at that and look at that. So we're a state that won some Race to the Top money, and 40% of teacher evaluation has to be sort of this data-driven way. And so as the principal of the school, I can look at it as, okay, this is the new initiative and we have to go forward and this is what Race to the Top is saying. Or I can say, okay, Race to the Top told me what I need to do with 40% of my evaluation, but I still have the other 60% to work with here and focus on what we want to focus on. So I think it's really up to the leaders to, as much as we can, not get too overly frenzied or stressed about the accountability measure, do as well as we can on these sort of traditional ones, but also to make sure that it doesn't have to be just because it's the newest accountability measure. It doesn't have to be always the thing that we focus on the most, and sort of finding where are those windows to find space for teachers. And I also feel like it's my job as principal to be a buffer to the teachers. So if there is some sort of stressful accountability measure, or somebody comes in and evaluates the school for 4 days, and there may be some things on this rubric or accountability measures that are not things we pay a lot of attention to because we put that time and energy into the innovative and, more technology-based practices, to tell teachers that it's okay, and we're going to do as well as we can, and sort of channeling a calm energy around it as much as possible, so that everybody doesn't get worked up and stressed out, because we don't want to burn the teachers out. So I try to, as much as I can, be a buffer, but I can't always be. The accountability measures can definitely get the best of us at different moments, but I think, just to summarize, finding those spaces, and it doesn't have to go with the big mass opinion, just trying to find the spaces and keep teachers calm, and let them know that, the work they're doing as well, and that, even if the traditional report doesn't come up that great, our traditional schools aren't really coming up that great either. So it's just a constant dialogue and trying to stay calm as much as possible.
And Liz, can I add one more piece to that? I think what we've heard consistently, both within the DOE and I think as part of the broader national conversation, is that everybody believes that schools need to be held accountable in some way, and there has been a pretty epic long struggle to figure out what exactly those metrics are and those assessments are that we hold schools to. And so one of the things that we're working with our schools on and New York City DOE is, as we're piloting these new metrics in the iZone schools, such as the motivation and engagement self-directed learning that I spoke about, is there a way to bring that more systemic, and to not always say that the iZone schools need to be exempted from the assessments that are out there, but how can we be informing the assessments maybe to make them better aligned with the innovation work, and just to provide some new alternatives to, I think, a conversation that is really looking for always a better way to be assessing schools.
Right, and part of what I hear you saying there is we have a lot of conversation about how to hold schools and educators accountable, but less conversation about accountable for what beyond test scores. Part of what Chrystina is talking about is the various things we hold ourselves accountable for that aren't just test scores, and to whom are we accountable, and maybe that's a broader conversation too. So just wanted to note that it's 2 o'clock now. Since we're rolling here with conversation, we've got other questions. We're going to keep going for another 10 minutes or so. So if you can hang with us, that would be great. If you do need to go, we appreciate your time and know that you'll be hearing from us with the PowerPoints and everything, so thank you for joining us today. So keep going. Kaira, I told you I had a question for you, and we're getting some questions. We're getting some questions about online learning. So have you been doing some online learning as part of your learning?
Yes, I've been doing PowerSpeak. I have put my work in Richard Picture, done a lot of interesting things.
Okay, so here's 2 questions for you. One is, what's your very favorite part about online learning? And then, and be honest with us, what are some of the drawbacks of online learning from your perspective?
All right. Well, some of the fun things about online learning is that you get to do something new, and usually I have homework when I have to do with PowerPoints or I have to do essays. So it actually prepares you for high school and college. So that's one of the interesting things about online learning. Now, one of the bad things about online learning is that sometimes you can't, like in PowerSpeak, sometimes you try to get the teacher's attention, and sometimes you have to learn how to do things by yourself, and other students can't get used to that easily, but eventually they do. So that's one of the hard things about online learning. And
then we have another question for you, too, which is straight from one of our participants, what are some of the ways in which global tech is different from your previous school, particularly, as you just said, in preparing you for your future? Could you give us a little compare-contrast?
I think that global tech prep is different because on my elementary school, actually, the teachers didn't focus on me as much as the teachers do in the school. And what I like about this school is that the community is small. So even though it's a public school, the community is small, and teachers and the staff pay more attention to you, and they see what you lack on and what you need help with. And also, Ms. Russell, as a good principal as she is, she tries to provide us with good teachers that can help us very well and help us achieve things. And actually, I'm going to be graduating next year, and I think that my idea of this school is that the idea that I have of this school is I've learned a lot in this school. I've gotten to get comfortable with people, and I usually don't get comfortable with people. And this school has helped me with my future because I came into this school as a level 3 student, and now I'm a level 4 student. And I love my teachers. I love the fact that they know how to be teachers, but at the same time, they know how to give you advice, how to see if there's something wrong with you or if there's nothing wrong with you. So this school has changed actually who I am in a way because it has made me a better person. It has made me do better things, and I'm really proud of being at this school.
Thank you, Kaira. And for those of you who aren't familiar with New York State assessment system, when Kaira said she moved from a level 3 to a level 4, she's basically saying she went from being pretty skillful to extremely so. And you saw that in her bio as well, which is saying she's now at the highest level in mathematics. And then we also just heard her talk about how the school is helping her in ways that aren't necessarily measurable on those tests. So thank you very much, Kaira.
And actually,
go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry. Okay.
You sure? Okay, just jump in if you remember what you were going to say. So we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to take up a bigger question about what policies really need to change to support this level of innovation. I don't think anyone's going to argue against the notion of personalizing learning for students, for trying to meet students where they are and bring them to great heights, as you guys are doing at Global Tech Prep. And you're saying some things are getting in the way, and we have this trick of balancing innovation and accountability. So Stacey and Chrystina, and let's hear from Chrystina first, and then we'll hear from Stacey about if you could wave your magic wand and change 1 or 2 policies that you think would really make it so you didn't have to get creative to go around things, but that would just make it a lot easier for you to do your work every day. What 1 or 2 things might those be?
Sure. I think the first, and most people would probably agree with me from whatever organizational background they're coming from, is, of course, budgeting. So not only needing more money, but, you know, in schools, a lot of the money is restricted to spending in certain ways or certain areas. So sometimes at the end of the year, I'll have a lot of money, you know, to purchase something out of a certain area that we already have and we don't need, but we sure might, you know, want to get all of our students Kindles to try to increase reading over the summer and have access to all the books out there rather than just a regular library book. So, you know, right now we have state money that must be spent on library books, but we can't buy with that, let's say, digital books right now. So it's not just the amount of money, but and that goes without saying for anything. Every organization always wants more money, but also the restrictions on spending. If we were allowed to, you know, perhaps justify why we wanted to spend money in a certain way or change it a little bit, that would definitely help. I think, I had great leadership training through the Leadership Academy here in New York City, but I think one thing that I would love to change is just more time somehow magically or more professional development for principals to help us really tap into the business world and not only having those innovative ideas, but how to work with businesses, understand what and how they're going to need, and build better partnerships between businesses and schools, because I think it's not going to happen just in the school ourselves. We have to really work with the nonprofit world, the government world, as well as the private enterprises to be as successful as possible. So I think better or more leadership training in that area. And lastly is, and I don't know what the accountability measure is, but our test scores they're okay. They're not the very best on the planet, but we're certainly not in any trouble at the city, state, or federal level with our test scores. But what are going to be the other ways that we show how students are growing? And I think some more creativity and some people may agree with No Child Left Behind in the testing procedures, but I don't know if any of us are really coming up with good alternatives. And so I think when we put on the policy perspective, we all really have to think about, okay, if we want to say we don't want our schools to be evaluated solely on test scores, then what is the alternative measure? How do we want to measure what kids are doing and how they're being tested? So it has to be beyond just the talk of, oh, I don't like this. We have to really start, if we want to go against that policy, offering some alternatives that still hold schools accountable, but also are, able to showcase some of the different things that we're doing and different ways that students show growth.
Thanks, Chrystina. Stacey, how about your magic wand?
I think two, if I can. The first is more internal. We know from just history and evaluation that it's unlikely that in the first year of implementing new and innovative practices, the student achievement is going to go up. We expect that there will be a slight decline before we see major gains. And so that's a communications task on our part to make sure that everybody at the DOE understands if they see those changes in the schools, why they're happening, and that they're not penalized for them. So I'd say that's number one. And number two is we currently have a waiver in front of the State Education Department to allow schools to grant credit irrespective of seat time. There's a seat time regulation in New York State that is not in many states throughout the country, which mainly says that in order for a student to gain credit, they have to physically sit within a classroom for a certain amount of time. This is a pretty significant barrier in getting to full-blown version of personalization, because with seat time, you still have kids, by and large, spending huge blocks of time together and moving from class to class, regardless of how quickly or not so quickly they're mastering the curriculum. And so we're able to move to a place where students are able to get credit based on the skills that they've mastered and the time they've mastered it. I think we'll be able to get to that full vision of personalization that we're all hoping for.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to wrap us up here quickly, and we'll just say our goodbyes and thank yous. I wanted to just highlight a few things that we heard from Kaira and Stacey and Chrystina that I think are certainly applicable beyond New York City within education, but also likely applicable across other sectors. One thing is they talked a lot about the need to focus and prioritize. So Stacey, when she first started talking, was saying they had to get really clear about the problem they were trying to solve here and to dig into the root causes. And Chrystina kept talking a lot about really honing in and deciding what not to do as a way that she's really been able to build a particular culture with her teachers, but also prioritize what's most important. And then the second piece is then once you do that, once you focus and prioritize, being careful about what you're focusing on. And one thing we heard them both talk a lot about as well, and we heard Kaira reflect this in her experience, is that they're focused on what students are actually learning. So focusing on the content, focusing on the task, and that technology is a means to that. And I think it's pretty easy for us to get distracted and have the innovation becomes a thing as opposed to the innovation serving the core function, which in the case of education is supporting the instructional core. So I think that's a really important thing, because sometimes we can innovate for the sake of it without getting really focused on what we're trying to do. And the final thing that we just wrapped up talking a bit about is how to balance innovation and accountability and make it okay to fail, and creating space for failure even when there's great urgency about your work, and what are the internal structures to do that, what are the leadership supports to do that, and eventually what are the policies that do that. So thank you, Stacey, Chrystina, and Kaira, for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your work with us, and we're going to be sharing ways for folks, but there were some questions we had that were quite specific about the kinds of work you do, and we hope that people can use the websites and other access you gave us to explore some of those very specific questions about your work. So thank you for joining us. For all of you out there, thank you for spending some time with us, and we hope that this helps you ask some questions about innovation in your own work and maybe pursue some different pathways than you might have before you joined us. So best of success in your work, and have a great school year, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.